Yeah, let's try the other one. Yeah, this shows the slides. This might be it. Okay, everyone, here we are. Well, I literally call this your elusive female ancestor reading between the lines, and here's why. Um, the problem is there's a serious lack of records, and this is my great grandmother Agnes, and she came to this country as Agnes Casey in 1901 and married Daniel Marr. And that's my grandmother, the little girl with the bow, and that's my great uncle Jack with the Buster Brown hat. And so, anyway, she became what they called a citizen by derivation. She married a naturalized American, and so she didn't have to apply to become an American. It just was automatic. But by 1922, a foreign woman could claim and file papers in her own right to become one. So it was just one of those little blips that happen every time in genealogy. Now, here's another thing. Even when there is a record, when you see a woman's name on a document, you don't know which name it is. I mean, it could be a maiden name, it could be a married name, it could be several married names. And here's why. This is the tombstone of Betsy Ross, and Betsy had 3 husbands. So she is known by her first husband's name, but she was Betsy Claypool at the time of her death. And so that takes a lot of digging through trying to figure out exactly, whose name are we actually looking at. Now, here's some places in federal records to look at, and U.S. Census is always at the top of the list because before 1850, women were just, and men too, were just, highlighted by tick marks. They only named the head of the household, but after 1850, things got a little better. So anyway, immigration passenger lists, Homestead Act land grants, naturalizations, tax forms, and most of these are available in places like Ancestry Library Edition, which most libraries do subscribe to. Some of them will have Fold 3 like we do. And there are a couple of free sites like familysearch.org, which is the best place to go if you don't have a subscription, and even some more obscure things. And this is where the Homestead Act comes in, the Bureau of Land Management, which is the General Land Office site. So there's a lot of places to look, and I'll show you more about that. Okay, now here's typical census thing. Here's Shadrach Sapp and my great-grand aunt Elizabeth Holder. She was 28, female, white, and her occupation was keeping house. This is in 1870, and these are their children. So they would name the females in the household, but until 1880, they didn't have the relationships, and that can be really important sometimes. Okay, now here's something interesting I dug up. I actually traced a New York woman's life through just documents, city directories, newspaper, and her name was Eliza Donor or Dooner, and it tells you an awful lot. And here's another issue. Eliza and her husband were misspelled in the census, and it seemed more like Duvor. And so if you're looking, you got to be a little creative when you're searching because you never know exactly how things were written down. Now, here's Eliza, and usually the first name you see is the head of the household. And here she is. She's the head of the household. She's a grocer, and here's her children. But not all of her children are here. The girls are not here, just her three sons. And so for Margaret, who was the oldest, chances are she got married. So that could lead you to start looking for a marriage record. Whereas Mary, who was the youngest in earlier on, and she might not have survived. I mean, children died a lot in those days. Now, but this is what we found out in the Brooklyn Eagle. John died in an accident. And this is the newspaper account of a coroner inquest. So that's why. And what was interesting is that Eliza had to sort of pull everything together, somehow get her children raised, become a businesswoman. And actually, by 1860, she was doing pretty well because, according to my notes, she had $1,800, at 500 of it in cash. And by our standards, by the year 2020, that would be something in the nature of $50,000. So she was doing pretty good considering. Now here she is in the city directory from 1864, and this time they spelled her as Dooner. And she's still a grocer. This is her address, 170 Tillery Street, and that was in downtown Brooklyn. And it's and also that's sort of interesting for a grocer because that was in walking distance of the New York docks, the Brooklyn docks, because Brooklyn was still a separate city then, and they were shipping a lot of food to the Union Army, and so she was doing quite well, I'm sure. Anyway, the thing is that you see this John Dooner, a laborer. He's probably not a relation, so that's another issue. You got to find out, who in these city directories are related, who of them are not. In 1870, in the city director, she's back to donor again. She's a widow. So if you didn't know that John was dead before, now you do. And by the 1880 census, she was more or less in retirement here. She's still the head of the household, but she's living with her son James and his wife Lizzie and her granddaughter Ethel. And here's where Margaret pops back up. Right next door at 119 Tillery is Edwin Dyer with his wife Margaret. And here's the next thing. Eliza passed away in 1892 at the age of 69, and she actually rests in the Cemetery of the Holy Cross in Brooklyn, New York, where my Mar relations are. So, and this is their stone. Here it is. Eliza Donor died January 10th, 1892, age 69 years. And here's her daughter, Margaret. And here's her husband, John. And here's Margaret's husband, Edwin. So they're all there together. So you can see that with a little creativity, you can find out an awful lot about a woman if you know where to look. Another thing is passenger lists. And this is actually a record of detained alien passengers. And on this list is Agnes Casey, somewhere right about here. And that's sort of an interesting story too, because single women were traveling alone were usually held for further examination at Ellis Island because they wanted specifically to know why a single woman was entering the United States, because they wanted to make sure she was not entering for the wrong reasons. And so anyway, her reason for coming to this country was, she said, to get married to Daniel Marr at 500 and a half 6th Avenue, Brooklyn, New York. So that's what she came here for. She came here to get married. Naturalization documents are also really, really good. And now Emma was the mother of my best friend Richard, and that's where they lived when I knew them. So they had been in that apartment for a long time, and it gave her age, when she became a citizen, and the date the certificate was issued, and in which court. And that's important because if you can find this index card, it gives you everything you need to know to find all the original records. And now there's a lot of numbers here, and I'll explain them what they are. This is the actual certificate number right up here. And down here is the petition number, and you should try to get both, because there are some things in one that are not in the other. And down here is something also interesting that some people should get, because of an act passed by the Congress in 1940. Anyone who was not a citizen of the United States by June 18th, 1940, was required to file under the Alien Registration Act of that year. So these are some more documents you should try to get. And the thing is that and you might ask, where can you get them? And where you can get them is either from uscis.gov, that's United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, or you can also get them from other places like the county clerk, or from the U.S. district, which is Brooklyn is the Eastern District. So if you went to 360 Adams Street in downtown Brooklyn, you can go and get a copy there. And actually, sometimes the best way to get it is from the county clerk, because it's generally cheaper and a lot faster. And actually, at this point, the USCIS is contemplating raising the fees for pulling these records, and they were all pretty steep. Talking about almost $200 for what they call the general index search, and another 85 just to get the actual copies of the documents. They're proposing a 300% rate increase, which is being fought very hard by the genealogy community. And but right now, we don't know where they're going with this. Another thing is military pension indexes, and this is a federal pension, and it gives you the name of the veteran, his widow, so you already know she's a widow, and it tells you which unit he was in. He was in the 9th West Virginia Infantry, and down here it says that's the original date, 1883, of when William applied for his pension, and that's his application number, certificate number, and where he was living when he filed. Well, it shows you right here in 1889, Nancy was filing as the widow, and these are her numbers. So obviously, William died. So you can get a lot of information out of these, and you can find them on a lot of different places like Ancestry or Family Search. Sometimes arrest warrants, because women did get arrested. And this is actually a warrant for Susan B. Anthony, because she attempted to vote, and that was illegal then, so they arrested her. And she actually went to court, and she complained that she was not only denied a jury of her peers, meaning women, she was denied a jury at all. And so they wanted her to pay $100, and she said she was not going to pay it. She would go to jail. But of course, they didn't do that because they really wanted this to go away. It was very, very bad publicity. They had a lot of women in Buffalo who were really mad at them about this. So anyway, they sort of let it go, but anyway, there's still a record. Now, not everything is on the federal level. Sometimes you have to go to the county or municipal level or the state level, and that's one of the hardest things in genealogy, is trying to figure out who has the records and how do you get them. And these are some of the kinds of records you will see. They have wills or letters of administration, marriage or divorce records, dower documents. We'll go into that a little bit more. And civil or criminal cases, which you just saw with Susan. Now, here's a state pension for my great grandmother, Virginia Howell, applied for a pension for her husband's service in the Civil War after his death in 1902. And so it says she lived in Floyd County, Virginia. And so she had all this thing, and it tells you when it was filed. And she claimed that he died of dropsy of the heart, which is an outdated medical term, but there are ways to find out what that would mean now. And another interesting thing is that one of these things they usually did for women is that they sort of had to provide some sort of proof they actually were married to the veteran. And this is sort of interesting because uh, her husband Thomas served in the Confederate forces, which the U.S. government considered to be ineligible service. And but a lot of states like Virginia and Florida here, who were in the old Confederacy, actually had their own pension funds. So she was able to qualify this. And one of the things about the marriage, she said, is that they eloped. She and her husband eloped when they were teenagers and got married. They rode over the border from Virginia into North Carolina, were married there. So, you find a lot of interesting little details when you look at this stuff. Asylum records, that's sort of offbeat, but you should definitely look for them because you could, it was very easy, especially for a woman to get committed in those days, because like for instance women fainted a lot because of the heavy clothing and the corsets, tight corsets, which actually moved some of your insides, your inner organs. That's how bad they were. And so it was considered to be some sort of a weakness, a mental affliction. I mean, they had some very strange ideas, but many state archives have records of state institutions. Some historical societies have them. So you should always check that out just to see how that you might be surprised because you just never know where some of your ancestors got to. Now, here's a very infamous case, which is still very controversial to this day. Robert Todd Lincoln, who was the Lincoln's only surviving son of their four sons, went to court to have his mother committed because her spending grew so wild that she was literally spending herself into paupery. And so under the law at that time, he had very little choice except to try to prove her mentally incompetent. And she would be diagnosed most probably today as bipolar because she had these really extremes in temperament. And so, he did actually win the case. She was, put into an asylum for a while, and he was able to get control of her spending. But like I said, the court record would be very interesting because it would have his testimony, her testimony, all the people who knew her, people who either said she was spending too much or people saying acting crazy, all sorts of things were going to be there. So you got to check that out. Find out if there's any court cases for an ancestor. Okay, of course, the counties have marriage, bond, or license records. And so this is actually a marriage record from May 26, 1832. And this is my great-great-grandfather, Daniel P. Holder, and he married a Mary Craven. And what is really interesting is that Mary was the first of his four wives. And so, and another thing you should look at is who are the witnesses, because usually they were, like here, they were usually somebody who was related to them. So that's always a good clue. But The reason why they had to file this is that it was the law in North Carolina that a man had to post, or his father, uncle, somebody had to post it, had to post a $500 bond to ensure that the marriage would happen. This was to protect the young woman. And so that's what he had to do in order to get married. Now, of course, the other side is divorce records, and this is a hilarious one from 1822 in Ohio, and this man, he sued for divorce. He said he was heretofore joined in marriage with Polly Clark, who had since committed adultery, treated him with extreme cruelty. I'm seeing things like frying pans, pitchforks, brooms, and had been willfully absent from him for a term of 5 years. So I think after 5 years and her beating him up all the time, it was time to part ways. So there's that record. And this is an interesting one, bastardy bonds. These are most common in the South, but they existed in some way or other. And it was actually would record the father of an illegitimate child so that the father could be forced to pay what we would call child support. And they would, if they were still in the county, the sheriff would come and get them, and they would put them in jail until they worked something out for the care of their child. And if they left the county, if the sheriff in County A heard that he was living in County C, he would send this bond to the sheriff in that County C, and they would just arrest him and transport him back to County A, to make him do what he had to do. Of course, marriage notices, you always got to be prepared for that, because they give maiden names as well as married names. So always be on the lookout for that. And wills, because women who were widowed generally own most of their husband's property, not always, depending on how his will was done. But if they inherited quite a bit, they could actually have these extensive lists of all of their holdings. And they had all things like spinning wheels, kitchen things, horses, cows. I mean, so you could really get a good picture of an early ancestor's life. Now, here's what I was telling you about, a letter of administration, because if somebody dies intestate, meaning without a will, somebody has to be appointed. Usually the deceased, before their demise, they pick an executor to handle everything. But after the fact, then somebody else has to take it over. And a typical case, and this is what happened to me, is that in my late mother's estate, the original executor had died. And so I had to actually fill out paperwork and finally get a letter of administration to make me the administrator of what was left of her estate. And so anyway, in this case, he was trying to get a $2,000 estate, which today is over $32,000. So it was definitely worth going for 100 years ago. Now, of course, in an estate, there are also inventories, and we sort of touched on that before with the wills. And this is the cover of Betty Lewis's, who was George Washington's sister. She died 2 years before he did, and it lists every single thing she owned. And it usually listed who it was to go to. And of course, family Bibles, that's one thing, since female births were generally not recorded officially, or it was very spotty. Like, for instance, my grandmother, Rosa Ellen, her birth wasn't recorded where she was born in Virginia. However, her brothers and her sister Evangeline's were. So for some reason, maybe the horse broke down, they couldn't get into town that day, and they just never got around to it. So if you have a family Bible, that's great. But if you don't, Some state libraries have collections, and there's even websites like Random Acts of Genealogical Kindness, and they're really cool too because sometimes people see these at yard sales and they buy them and they put them on the website saying, "Do you, if anyone knows who this belongs to get in touch with me." So there's all different ways to do it, and actually, like I said, many state libraries and the Library of Congress, they actually have in their catalog collections of family Bibles. And sometimes the family Bible is the only record of a woman's birth at all. Another thing to look at is the Daughters of the American Revolution Patriot Indexes, because generally when a woman wanted to get into DAR, she had to prove that she was related to somebody who gave aid and comfort to our American cause. And that's one group, the Daughters, and the Daughters actually have this great online thing where you can put in somebody's name, and when you, as a patriot, and then if they have a record of them, they'll have a record of all the women who applied because they were related to them. So it's a really great thing to look for. Another thing to find out about female ancestors is something called Cindy's List. And Cindy Howell has been gathering and making available for free all sorts of genealogical links. And now 170 of them are resources for searching female ancestors. And when you go into it, they actually have a category list, a subject index, they have a search window. So there's all different ways to find out about how to find places that are devoted to helping find, women in genealogy. Now we're going back. This is what I promised. Wills and Dower. Uh, they have a language on Dower rights because basically, when somebody got married, um, either the bride's father would put up or some money, or the family would somehow they would put up a certain sum of money, or able monies from rents collected, actual grants of land, and basically a third of what her husband owned was going to be set aside for his wife and children if he died. And he couldn't pledge it as collateral. He couldn't spend it. He couldn't do anything. It's very much like if you have a child and you want them to do television commercials, you have to set up a trust for that child, and you can't touch that money. Whatever money they make is held for them until they reach legal age. And so basically the dower is pretty similar. An interesting twist on this dower was that when California entered the Union in 1850, they still kept a lot of the old Spanish administration rules. And one of them was that if a woman wanted to make sure her property wouldn't be seized for her husband's debts, what they had to do is that they would go to the courthouse and they would actually provide a list of all their possessions, and it would be put in on file in the county recorder's office, so that if her husband went bankrupt and he says, well, I've got this fine horse I want to sell, his wife will say, well, no, that's my horse. It's my father gave it to me, and it's in the courthouse. You can't sell that. Now, of course, that goes the opposite way too, because there's actually a provision in the law that allowed women to actually surrender their dower if they felt they had to their husband or to another person in the family for one reason or another. So the law can be very, very flexible at times on these things. And of course, newspapers. Now, there's a lot of places to look for ancestors in newspapers, like I found in the Brooklyn Eagle website, which is free. All you have to do is register. It's actually is provided by the Brooklyn Public Library, and you just put in somebody's name, and I have a Catherine Conroy Marr, and she died in 1929, and I have her obit. So it actually tells you a lot. There's a couple of different places where you can find old newspapers. Uh, a free one that's very good is run by the Library of Congress, and it's called Chronicling America. So if you just search that in Google, it will take you right there. And they have like 200 years of newspapers for the entire country. And otherwise, most of them are places like Newsbank, Genealogy Bank. I mean, these are all subscriptions, but even then, if you had to, you could use them because most of them have these trial periods, generally about 3 months, where you could do a whole bunch of searching. The only thing is that when the time comes to end it, let's say you start in January and it ends March 31st, make sure you let them know you don't want to continue because you've given them your credit or debit card, and if you don't tell them, you've got a year's membership subscription. So just always remember that. But it's sometimes it's worth going into these little trial periods just to find certain pieces of information. Now, I mentioned this before, but this is a perfect case of a woman in a city directory because, like we were doing that with Eliza, well, this is a little closer to home because right here is Wilcox Rosa. That's my grandmother, and this is from Winston-Salem, North Carolina in 1929. And it says she was the widow of TQ. TQ is Thomas Quincy, who I was named for. And their home was 666 Buxton Street, which basically doesn't exist. It's like this humongous 8-lane highway going right through the middle of town. So all the houses are gone. I already looked. And anyway, one of the things you can do is that, well, you can find out when did she become a widow. And actually, I found out that North Carolina has digitized death certificates, and she was a widow for 10 years by this point. And another thing is that two of her 11 children are living with her. My father, Howard, was an employee at the Haynes Hosiery Mills, and my uncle Frank was a clerk at Frank Urban, which was a men's clothing store in town. So you can find out an awful lot from these things if you know where to look. And in this particular one, I actually got it from University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. They've been digitizing these city directories. So you just sort of look at universities, local historical societies, state libraries, subscription databases. You really sort of have to sort of bounce around almost like a ping pong ball to find out where all this stuff is. And these are a couple of books you might find in your library to sort of help you shepherd you through the process because, like I said, were always much better documented. And so books like these will sort of help you sort of figure out, what to get, where can you get it. And so these are just two things. And there's also a lot of places like one plug I can give is Family Search. They have a series of things called wikis, and if you do something like genealogy for women wiki, Family Search genealogy for women wiki, it'll take you to something, and they have a wiki for everything. You want to find out what kind of genealogy records there are for Los Angeles County, you just do that. If you want to find out what kind of records they've got for like Suffolk County, Virginia, they have a page for that. They have a page for everything. I mean, it's definitely worth looking at. And so that, without further ado, is the end of my presentation. And good luck in your search. And I am open for any questions if anyone wants to get into their chat room. And just press chat and give us any questions you might have. And thank you for letting me go on about all my relatives. Unmute, unmute, yeah. Okay, everyone's unmuted. If you have any questions.
You want to say something about your grandmother?
Tom, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Listen, thank you very much for that picture of my grandmother, Casey. I've never seen her before, or Uncle Jack, or your grandmother.
Oh yeah.
It's wonderful seeing that.
Oh yeah. You know, I can actually send you an electronic version of it, but that was taken actually in the summer of 1906. So she was like 4, and Jack was, I think, 3.
And Agnes was older?
Uh, yeah, Agnes was the oldest. Yeah, she was born 1902, and Jack was born, I think, 04, and your mother, Monica, was 1908.
1907.
Yeah.
1907, yeah.
Okay. So anyway, I think I see. Let's see if there's. All right, I see some chats here. Zoom group chat. Oh, okay. Kathy says, thanks, Tom. I'm glad you were able to attend, Kathy. And oh yeah, Debbie, I can see the Ukrainian. Yeah, that could be an issue. And actually, in one of my other programs, I actually go into that. One of the great urban legends that ever was is that your names were all changed by the clerks at Ellis Island. They weren't. There's a whole story to that, but I've read like 24 or 25 different articles debunking that. But I knew you would like that, Debbie, because you like urban legends. So does anyone have any other questions? Anything else they want to know?
Thank you very much. Beautiful, beautiful presentation. You know, it's so nice to hear all of that information and to be able to go back to all that, the time way back when.
Oh yeah, thanks. And you know, wait till I actually learn how to use Zoom, and then you'll see something better.
Okay.
Well, I was just thinking, Tom, it's been 64 years since the last time I saw you. You've
Yeah.
changed a little bit.
Oh yeah, yeah, I have. But you know, actually, because I can't get a haircut, I'm beginning to look like Joseph Biden's younger brother. You know, but yeah, no, but anyway, my hair's all white and everything, but I'm still the same adorable Tom you remember 64 years ago.
Beautiful.
I've got to come out sometime real soon.
That's good. You gotta have a busy humor.
Hmm.
Little bit of humor now and then.
Okay, well, you know, I'll keep up with you, and we'll set a date. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Tom.
Okay, I'm going to end everything. If anyone doesn't has any questions or anything, if not, we're going to totally end this. So thank you all for coming.